Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Training Tidbits podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartledge from Animal Training Academy, and I'm extremely excited about having you here with us today and being back in your eardrums to talk all about best practice behavior management for what is set to be another amazing episode. I can't wait to dive in and learn all about today's guests and their learning odyssey. If you haven't checked the past episodes out yet, then make sure to head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and you can listen to them all there. Or you can also find them on iTunes and or on Stitcher. There is definitely something there for absolutely everyone, as well as some sensational up and coming episodes planned over the next wee while. Just before we do get started, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone that listens to this podcast on a regular basis, or maybe you are joining us for the first time ever. This show is so much fun to make, and I get inspired thinking about all the people that have benefited from all the wisdom our podcast guests have shared. Today's episode is, of course, going to be no exception to this. And if you do like the episode today, then please share it as far and as wide as you possibly can. Also, I appreciate that a lot of you listen to the podcast on apps from your mobile devices and smartphones. One thing you could do that would be really appreciated is navigate to the title of the podcast, and around there somewhere you should find three little dots. If you tap on this, it opens up a menu, and one of the options in that menu is to share. And you can easily put this on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever social media network you might use. I'd be extremely grateful if you could take a couple of seconds to do that. But we will get started on today's episode, where I'm going to be talking to Dr. Kate Mornement. Dr. Kate is a PhD qualified applied animal behaviourist based in Melbourne, Australia. In 2004, Kate established her animal behaviour consultancy practice, Pets Behaving Badly, and has consulted pet owners experiencing behavioural difficulties with their pets ever since. Kate also works as an expert witness in dangerous and menacing dog matters, assessing the behaviour and temperament of the dogs involved. She is an associate editor of Pet Behaviour Science, a new open access journal which publishes the latest research on pet behaviour. Kate is an invited speaker to conferences and pet-related events, writes for several magazines, and is regularly sought by media for comment and interviews regarding animal behaviour. A strong advocate of science-based positive reinforcement training and ongoing education, Kate has been fortunate to learn from some of the world's most respected animal trainers, including Steve Martin, Ken Ramirez, Barbara Heidenreich, Terry Ryan, and Dr. Susan Friedman. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome one Kate Mornement to the show today. Kate, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you very much. We're going to dive straight in today, Kate, to the first question. Can you please take us back to where you first started to learn all about positive reinforcement animal training and some of the first animals you ever trained using it?
Sure. So I didn't formally start learning about positive reinforcement training probably till I was in my early 20s. But back when I was a teenager, I kind of anecdotally started learning about it just through training my own pet dog. So we had a blue heeler called Harley when I was about 14 years old. He was a super smart dog. I knew nothing about training, so I took him off to the local community-based dog training school, and I was taught, just like everybody else, to use choker chain to punish unwanted behaviour. But just through training him at home and in the backyard, I started to use treats and actually noticed that he was a much quicker learner and much more motivated to figure out what I was trying to ask him to do when I had treats on offer, rather than just punishing behaviour that I didn't want him to do. So yeah, I guess the first animals that I trained were dogs. We also had a few pet birds when I was a kid, and they taught me very quickly that if you punish them, they bite you and fly away. So I tended to steer away from more of the harsh punishment as a kid and steer more towards the positive things. But yeah, it wasn't until I started attending conferences conferences and workshops all about positive reinforcement training and meeting some of the world's most respected trainers that I became aware of how unnecessary physical punishment was. Yeah, and then again throughout my PhD candidature, I worked as a research assistant for the Anthrozoology Research Group and also the Animal Welfare Science Centre. And my exposure to all the latest peer-reviewed research on animal training and behaviour and also welfare clearly showed me that using harsh punishment is really detrimental to learning and welfare, and that positive reinforcement is so much more effective.
Yeah, that's really cool. And you share similarities with some of the other guests where you kind of started figuring it out for yourself, and then you met some of the people you mentioned. How did that feel when you suddenly learnt that there was a whole community of people doing this? And not only that, there was a science behind what you had been doing.
Yeah. It felt really amazing because it kind of validated what I was feeling and what I was seeing through my own experiences. Ever since I've had pets, I've always noticed that it feels better when you use things that your pets like to reward behaviours that you want to see more of. And it's not nice when you punish them. Yeah, whenever I learnt mainly through dog training schools, to punish behaviour you don't want, I could clearly see that my dog wasn't enjoying it, and it kind of affects the way your animal perceives you and the trust that they have in you. So yeah, it felt really, really good to start connecting with all these amazing people who just use positive reinforcement, which completely negates the need to use punishment. So it was great.
So wonderful. And I love hearing about people's behavioural odysseys. So thank you very much for sharing that, Kate.
That's a pleasure.
For our next question, I was wondering if you could please tell everyone listening about something you have already mentioned, and that is a massive accomplishment, gaining your PhD. Congratulations on this, by the way.
Thank you so much.
Can you share what you did your PhD on and a little bit about some of your findings?
Sure thing. So yeah, the PhD took me a long, long time. It was a huge undertaking, but I also chose a topic that I was really passionate about, and that really helped me get through it and complete it in the end. So the topic that my PhD was on was shelter dogs and assessing their behaviour for adoption suitability. So we looked at shelter dogs and how they're currently assessed to determine adoption suitability. And that involved firstly doing a review. So I travelled around Australia and visited 11 different shelters and observed their assessments to see what they're doing, because there was absolutely no research that could tell us what was currently being done. And what this review showed was that everybody's doing something different, and none of the assessment protocols that were currently being used had ever been scientifically validated, which means they hadn't been tested to make sure that they actually do what they're supposed to do. So this meant that euthanasia decisions were being made based on the results of invalid assessments. So most people realise that when a dog ends up in a shelter, they first have to undergo some kind of temperament or behaviour assessment to make sure that they're safe for adoption. So dogs that pass the temperament assessment are put up for adoption, and those that fail are usually euthanized depending on the resources that that particular shelter has. So this was a big eye-opener. And so the next part of my research was, okay, can I develop an assessment protocol and then test it for reliability and validity? So basically, I came up with this assessment protocol that included all the most common elements of tests currently being used. I implemented it into a shelter, and we tested the test-retest reliability. So that meant, do you get the same results when you test a dog on one day versus 24 hours later? And we also looked at inter-rater reliability. So if you have two different people assessing the same dog, do you get the same result? And we also looked at predictive validity. So do the results that you get in the shelter follow through to the home once the dog's adopted? And pretty much the results were pretty bad in terms of test-retest reliability. So it wasn't, the protocol I came up with wasn't particularly valid from one day to the next. So behaviour changed over a 24-hour period. The inter-rater reliability was really good. So two experienced raters would get the same behaviour or score the behaviour in a similar way. But the predictive validity was the worst. The protocol was not predictive of future behaviour. And this really makes sense because, you know, you cannot control the kind of environment that a dog's going to go in, and the shelter environment is very, very different to the home environment. But the implications for it is that what shelters are assessing in the shelter environment may not be very indicative of what that dog will be like in a home. So, yeah, it was, I set out trying to save all the dogs, and I'm going to come up with a test everyone can use, and it's going to be great. And then the opposite happened, which is quite common in research, and when people do their PhDs, you kind of open a Pandora's box and there's just more and more questions that you need to answer. So that's the short version of what I did for my PhD.
Well, it sounded like a great experience getting to travel around and seeing all these setups and learn what everyone was doing or not doing. Has anything evolved from the research you did in the question, what would you call it, the questionnaire you came up with, or the testing method you came up with? Has it been built upon, or what's happened since?
Yep. So when I first started my PhD, there weren't a lot of people actually researching this area, but since then, a lot more research has been done both in Australia and overseas, and this research kind of confirms what I found. So other research groups and other people have investigated validity of temperament assessments used in shelters and have pretty much found the same thing that I did, that they're not particularly valid, that the shelter environment's really stressful. And what I kind of concluded in my thesis was perhaps we need to look at a different model when it comes to rehoming dogs. So one thing I proposed was looking at a foster care model. So this hasn't been done, and I'd love to be involved in some further research to do this, but applying the temperament assessment to dogs living in foster care and then following that through once they're adopted. Perhaps having dogs in foster care rather than in a shelter would yield more reliable results in terms of a temperament assessment. So there's more research being done, but it's very early days in this sort of field in dog behaviour, and particularly assessing temperament in the shelter environment. But yeah, research so far is indicating that these tests aren't very valid. Perhaps we need to look at doing it a different way.
Yeah, as you said, you kind of called it a Pandora's box before. There's just an infinite number of variables, isn't there?
There is, because you can't, the other thing you can't do is control how the adopters will interact or engage with the dog. Do they understand positive reinforcement? Do they understand what the dog's doing? Or are they using the pack leader mentality, trying to be the boss of their dog? So there are so many variables that you just can't control for, but that's life. That's what happens when we have pets. That's just how it is. So we kind of have to work around them.
Well, I feel like your research was super important then, because that Pandora's box needed to be open.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, look, it did. It's disheartening in a way because, the whole point of a PhD is to try and solve a problem. And I wasn't able to solve the problem, but I guess I was able to shed light on why there is such a problem and perhaps guide other researchers down the path to investigate that sort of stuff a bit further.
Yeah, and like you said, that's kind of I don't know if you said it in these words, but that's kind of the role of any kind of scientific paper, isn't it? To push our understanding and test our assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep, that's how science works. It builds upon, all the studies build upon one another and help to refine our understanding and our knowledge. So, yeah, we just need more research. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of funding for this sort of stuff. So if anyone out there wants to fund some research, get in touch, because there's so much more that needs to be done.
Well, fantastic, Kate, and thank you so much for sharing that. That was a lot of fun to learn about.
No worries.
For our next question, I wanted to talk about the fact that you have been involved in creating content and media for quite a while now. You have your own blog, you've had a regular spot on a TV show, you've had regular contributions to magazines, as well as many other types of media. Can you share with everyone listening a little bit about some of the things you've been / are involved in, and maybe share some stories from some of your favourite experiences so far?
Sure. So I guess one of the funnest things I've been involved in was a TV show called Hound TV. So yeah, I was a resident animal behaviourist and a part-time presenter for the show. It was so much fun. It was a great show to be involved in because it was all about dogs, and I just love dogs. We got to do lots of segments on dog behaviour and training, the benefits of positive reinforcement training. I got to meet so many passionate people and like-minded people and just do lots of fun stories. They were a great bunch of people to work with to make that TV show. So that was fun. And I don't know. I just love my job. I'm so lucky. I'm one of those people that gets to do what they love for a living. I don't feel like I work. But one of the really fun things I also enjoy is writing for a magazine called Pets Magazine. So I do a regular column called Naughty or Nice, and readers write in with their pet behaviour problems or questions. And yeah, I get to educate them about animal behaviour and humane training and behaviour modification using positive reinforcement. So it's mainly kids that write in. This is a magazine geared mainly towards children, and I think that's really cool because I would have loved to have known about this stuff when I was a kid, because I wouldn't have wasted a lot of time using punishment in training. So yeah, I feel really good about helping kids understand what motivates animal behaviour and what underlies problem behaviour and how to resolve it using positive reinforcement.
That sounds like a lot of fun, because you and I were talking before we pushed record about the curse of knowledge and how you have to be aware of what you know and what others don't know. And a good friend of mine says you don't understand something properly until you can explain it to a 6-year-old.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And yeah, I guess that's really true. In my work, I hang around, and again, we were talking about this before you hit record too, that we tend to hang around like-minded people who know a lot of the stuff that we know, but when you have to explain this stuff to a layperson or to a child, you really have to break it down in simple terms to help them understand it. So yeah, I really enjoy teaching people about the benefits of positive reinforcement and helping them understand, that their dog's not trying to be the boss of them, they're just doing what works for them.
And how do you get that across to children? Do you relate to, say, if you clean your room, your mum gives you M&Ms? I mean, I don't teach children this information, so I'm really curious about kind of what techniques you employ to break it down to younger people.
Yeah, I guess I just try not to use so much jargon. Like when animal trainers are talking to each other, we use a lot of terminology and scientific terms. So I try and break it down so that kids understand. So rather than use reinforcement, which is a big, heavy word, I tend to use reward or something good, that sort of thing. So I don't dumb it down or anything like that, but I try and explain it in simple terms that kids would understand.
Awesome. And it sounds like if you're doing that, it's going to be good for everyone to read.
Well, yeah, that's it. I have been writing for magazines and websites for a while now. So I guess I find it pretty easy to, and also with the blog, I think it's important to explain things in a way that, anybody who's got no understanding of science or animal training can understand, because if it's too heavy on the jargon, it just, goes over their head and they're not interested, or they find it difficult to understand. They're not going to want to learn how to use it.
And you mentioned your blog there. Can you just build upon that a little bit and tell people where they can go to find your blog and read your blog?
Sure. So, yeah, I started the blog a few years ago and then went on a bit of a hiatus, and I've come back to it now since I'm at home a lot more with the kids. I find it easy to write informative articles in a blog post while I've got a little bit more time. So the blog is mainly geared towards pet owners and helping to resolve common pet behaviour problems, but also educate them on why animals do what they do and how best to modify behaviour. So I'm trying to debunk some of the myths that still remain, particularly the need to be the pack leader and dominate your dog, but there are lots of others as well. So the blog, there's a button on my website that links to the blog, and my website is petsbehavingbadly.com.au. If you go up to the top right-hand corner, I think there's a little button that takes you to the blog site where you can access my blog. I also post blog posts on my Facebook page, which is Pets Behaving Badly Solutions with Dr. Kate.
Cool. And we will link to all of the stuff in the write-up for the podcast, so you'll be able to find it nice and easily. On that note, is the Pet Magazine an online magazine, or is it just hard copy?
It's not, unfortunately, no. It's just a hard copy, but that magazine's available for people living in Australia. You can get it from Coles and most news agencies.
And the TV show, you can also link to those from your website?
Yeah, I think I have a few videos on the media tab on the website, but you can also go to YouTube and type in Hound TV. There are a few episodes up on YouTube, I think.
Awesome. We'll link to one of those in the write-up as well for anyone wanting to see Kate in her old TV show. Hey, great stories, and I'm sure everyone listening is really enjoying hearing about all of your experience here, Kate. So once again, thank you very much. My guess would be that additionally, the people listening are starting to take away something from your story, and I get this impression when I talk to you, and that is that you are a lifetime learner. Can you please talk to this, Kate, and share a little bit about some of your experiences? I'd really love to hear about your trip to the US, and I saw you got to spend some time at Shed Aquarium with Ken Ramirez.
Yeah, so I'm a really strong advocate of lifetime learning, and I think being a scientist has really helped to cement how important that is for me. Science is always progressing, and so is our understanding of animals, how they learn, what they need to be happy and to have good welfare, and how best to train them to do the things that we want them to do. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of trainers out there, particularly in the dog training world, who continue to teach and use really outdated aversive training methods. And most of them do it because it works, So why fix what's not broken from their point of view? But these people, if they were also engaged in ongoing education and if they understood the latest science, they couldn't justify continuing to use those harsh methods that they use. So yeah, I've been really, really lucky to learn from some very highly respected and experienced trainers, particularly in the USA. I've attended week-long immersive professional animal training workshops with Ken Ramirez at Shed Aquarium, which was incredible, but also Steve Martin and Dr. Susan Friedman at Natural Encounters in Florida. So these experiences were amazing, and I learned so many valuable lessons. There are so many great opportunities out there if people just go looking. And so the best advice I can give is really to stay humble. So the more you learn, this is what I find, and talking to people, I'm sure you're the same. The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know, which motivates me to continue to learn. So yeah, I guess some of the things, particularly with Ken's workshop at Shed, but also the Natural Encounters workshop, you're working with animals that, they're not attached to a lead and forced to be with you. They can swim away or fly away anytime they want. So if your timing's not right, or the reinforcer you have isn't valued highly enough, those animals just move away. If they don't want to be there, they won't. And that's a really humbling experience, but it's brilliant for ensuring your timing is good and that you're using the right reinforcer. So those sorts of experiences really do help improve your training. They're amazing. So I highly recommend those experiences to anyone who's interested in learning more. I think training species that you're not used to training really, really helps. So some of the things I've done, training flighted parrots at Natural Encounters. I don't train a lot of parrots, mainly dogs. Chickens are another great example of an animal that really helps you improve your training skills too.
And I am quite jealous you've got to work with an amazing species I have, and I did see some photos of you hanging out in a pool with some beluga whales.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Really amazing. There's something about marine mammals. I haven't done a lot of work with them at all, but the few experiences I've had, have really changed the way I see animals. I just think we have so much more to learn, and I find it really hard. I don't always agree with keeping marine mammals in aquariums because I think, we think we know a lot, but I think there's a lot more we have to learn, and to assume that we're keeping those animals happy all the time because we're using positive reinforcement and we're providing excellent vet care, I'm just not sure. I think that, more research will be done and we'll shed more light on the emotional intelligence of those animals and what they need to really be happy. Just the few moments I've spent with those sorts of animals, it's changed me. Like, you can see how intelligent they are. It's quite incredible.
And a lot of exciting research being done on the emotional side of animals at the moment. So
there is. It's an amazing field. It is quite young, so I don't doubt that in the next 10 years that the discoveries that are going to be made will continue to blow our minds, I think.
Mm-hmm. One thing you mentioned, and I just want to touch on quickly just before we move on, is you said something along the lines of the more you learn, the less you know. Mm-hmm. Which is something that I definitely can resonate with. And since starting Animal Training Academy, I've realised how little I do know. Can you speak to that a little bit more and just build on that idea that it's okay to not know things and to make mistakes?
Sure thing. So I guess you don't know what you don't know. It's hard to explain, but the more I learn from different people, the more I realize I didn't know before, and the more I realize how much more there is to learn. So not just of things that have already been discovered, but things that have yet to be discovered. I'm particularly aware of quite a lot of research going on in the dog world around emotions, behavior and training and that sort of thing. And what we're finding out about dogs is absolutely incredible. And 5-10 years ago, we didn't know these things. And what we're learning is changing the way we think about dogs and changing the way that we manage them in pet homes and deal with behavior problems. And I think it's the same for all animals, whether they're zoo animals, animals living in an aquarium, or our pets. The more research that's done and the more we discover about how they think, how they feel, what they want and what they need, I think there's going to be a bit of a revolution in the way that we keep animals, whether they're captive exotic animals or pets. So, it's exciting times to be around for us animal trainers, I think.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we got an opportunity to talk about this today. I'm also really excited about all the new science that is going on, and also that it's okay for us as scientists to talk about this stuff now, which is the case.
It is. And going back to it's okay to make mistakes, I mean, that's how science progresses. Most of the research that's published is stuff that worked, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, there's a whole lot of research that gets done that never gets published because it didn't work. But that stuff is so important because we move away from that. We move away from what doesn't work and build upon what does. So, it's important.
Sadly, we are nearly at the end, but that's okay because we're also heading into one of my favorite parts of the podcast show, and this is story time. Kate, can you please share with everyone listening 2 or 3 stories from your experience training animals so far and some of the really important lessons that you've learned along the way?
Oh, so many lessons. I find it really hard to pick out a couple of ones that really stick to mind, but I guess I'll share one that's not particularly a happy story, but it is an important one that happened really, really early on in my learning. So I talked a little bit about a blue heeler dog that we had called Harley at the beginning of the podcast. So he was the reason I got into training and was so fascinated about it, because at the time I had no formal training at all in animal behavior or training. I was just a kid in the backyard teaching my dog to do tricks and using treats and things like that to reward him. So one of the things we used to do with him, he was 11 months old at the time, but we used to walk him off lead all the time because he was the kind of dog that just walked with you, never ran off, never walked away. He was always one of those dogs you could walk without a lead. And one day my mum and dad took him for a walk and they went along the same way they always did. And on this particular day, a dog across the road, this was a main road, barked. And Harley just went racing across the road to get to this other dog. And he got hit by a car and he died. And it's a horrible, horrible story. But I think it's a really important one because particularly as pet owners, we often assume that we know exactly what our dog's going to do or our animal is going to do. And it's just not the case. One of the really important lessons that I've learned is you cannot control what another animal is going to do. You can only observe their behavior and try to control and manage the environment as best as possible. But you can never predict 100% what the animal will do. And I guess this is really important in the dog training world because one of the things that persists is you have to get reliable behavior. And lots of dog trainers out there will say, you can get a reliable recall, but you need to use punishment. And one of the things that I tell clients is you can't control the environment. And so I just think safety is always more important than, that want to have a dog that you can walk without a lead. So that's one of the most important lessons I've learned. It was a pretty harsh lesson early on, but I've also had experiences that have reinforced that since then. So I see a lot of clients who say to me, I just want a dog I can walk off lead. But it's probably not that realistic. And in terms of safety as well, because a lot of dogs out there aren't well socialized. And I also work with people whose dogs have been attacked by other dogs. So that's one thing I would say is a pretty important lesson, that safety is more important because you can't control the environment. So that's a bit of a sad story, but an important one, I think. And the other thing, I guess, the other important lesson that keeps getting reiterated for me is to help your animal love training and be engaged in the training by using reinforcers that they value, not reinforcers we assume are rewarding, making it fun for them, and also having realistic expectations. Pet owners, I see this with pet owners particularly, we often have really unrealistic expectations around our pets and their behaviour. We forget that animals have instinctual behaviours and needs, and we put them in environments that are far removed from the environments that they evolved to live in. So, for example, cats, they're predators. They're built to patrol a territory. They're highly territorial. They don't cope very well typically with other cats in their territory, but when we have them in our homes with lots of other cats and we don't provide outlets for instinctual needs, we get a lot of behaviour problems. So, yeah, I think another lesson is looking at the animal and their needs and understanding them, rather than having the focus being on how can I get my animal to do what I want them to do.
Cool. And before we go on, so sorry about Harley.
Oh, that's okay. Oh, yeah, it was awful. Like, he was only 11 months old when he got hit, but it's just one of those things. We wouldn't have thought it would happen in a million years, but it did. Yeah. So I always share that story, even though it's really sad. I share it because I don't want it to happen to anybody else. So if it means it makes people a little bit more cautious, when out and about with their dogs, then that's a good thing.
And I like your input there about managing expectations. And can we potentially build on this a little bit more? How does someone who has expectations that aren't being met, because that leads to something called frustration. It's
you mean from the person's point of view?
Yeah, exactly. If they expect their animal to be doing something and it's not.
So I think it's important to look at why is the animal not doing what you want. Usually it's because their needs aren't being met. So I find if we can meet the animal's needs first and foremost, then we can often then get them to do what we want them to do a lot easier. I see this a lot in pets, dogs that bark all day because they're at home 8 hours a day in the backyard with nothing to do. Dogs are highly, highly social animals. They need company. If they don't have somebody there, they can get bored or they can get really anxious and stressed at being alone and develop behaviour problems like excessive barking, destructive behaviour, digging, trying to escape. We see a lot of issues in cats with inappropriate toileting, especially in multi-cat households, because cats by nature are really territorial. Even when they share their home with other cats that they know, they can develop territorial spraying, which can become a huge issue for people. And problem behaviour often results in, people relinquishing their pets or getting rid of them. So we really need to try and manage people's expectations, but also help them understand that there is help out there, and problem behaviours like that can be resolved with a bit of understanding and management, and also positive reinforcement training.
So great, and fantastic stories and lessons. So thank you very much for that, Kate.
No worries.
Sadly, that does bring us now to our final question for this episode. Could you, for this question, Kate, take us all into the future and share with the people listening what you would like to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years in the animal training world?
Sure thing. So I'm going to talk to, I guess, my world, which is pets and particularly dogs. So in the dog training world, I would love in 10 years' time to not hear the phrases, my dog's trying to be dominant over me, or I'm being the pack leader and it's not working. So I'd really like positive reinforcement training with our dogs to be the norm for regular pet owners. So I'll move away from dominance-based training purely to positive reinforcement. So this is happening, but it's a bit slow. I think it can happen a little bit quicker. And I'd also like to see a shift in the way that we keep and understand pets. So kind of like what I was talking about before, most pet behaviour problems are the result of us not adequately meeting our pets' needs. So if we can consider the behavioural needs of our pets much more than we currently do, I think that will help improve the relationship that we have with our pets as well as our pets' welfare.
And in the zoo world, we talk a lot about enrichment, and I share that information with pet owners via Animal Training Academy as well. Is this something that you've found pet owners know about?
Yeah, so lots of pet owners know about enrichment, I guess in a more basic form. So things like training or, taking your dog out for walks, a lot of people still aren't aware of feeding enrichment. So one of the things I recommend to most of my clients, whether actually all of them, doesn't matter if they have a dog, a bird or a cat, is feeding enrichment. So get rid of the food bowl, feed your animals through a feed dispensing toy. But then also it depends on the animal. So species specific enrichment is really important. So with dogs, they're highly scent driven. So giving them activities to do that help them use their nose is really, really important. Same with birds. Birds need to use their beak. They ideally need to fly as well. So educating people around species specific enrichment to help keep animals happy is, really important.
Throw away the bowls.
Throw away the bowls. No animal living in the wild gets their food for free in a bowl and doesn't have to work for it. So why do we assume, it's a very human thing. We serve up our dinner on a plate and eat at regular times during the day, but that's not how any animal acquires or eats their food. So we need to start looking at the way we keep and manage animals from the animal's point of view and from what they're designed and have evolved to do and behave, not how we think things should be done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And if you listen to this podcast and you got some great stories about how you threw away the bowls, then please leave a comment on the podcast right up. We'd love to hear from you. Such a great vision. And we, of course, are all working really hard to make these things transpire a little bit faster as we move forward over the coming years. Before we do wrap up today, Kate, you've already mentioned it before, but maybe just remind everyone listening where they can go to find out more about you, your blog, and what you do.
Sure. So people can find out more via my website, which is www.petsbehavingbadly.com.au. You can also find me on Facebook. I'd love to connect on Facebook. So find my Facebook page at Pets Behaving Badly Solutions with Dr. Kate.
Fantastic. And as mentioned, we'll link to all of that stuff in the podcast write-up. It does officially now, sadly, bring us to the end. So from myself and on behalf of everyone listening, a ton of Animal Training Academy gratitude to you, Kate, for making the time to come on the show today. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been really, really fun.
It has definitely been a lot of fun, and we hope that you out there listening to this episode enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it. We do, of course, additionally really appreciate all of you guys tuning in today as well. And I want to ask a small favor of those listening. If you do enjoy these podcasts, and as a practitioner of best practice behavior management yourself, you feel that the information held within could help others, then please share this episode wherever you can. On Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, Snapchat, whatever you use, so that as a community, we can do absolutely everything within our power to disseminate this information as far and as wide as possible. And one really easy way to do this, if you're listening to it from a podcast app on your mobile device or smartphone, is that there should be 3 little dots next to the title of the episode. This might change slightly between devices and depending upon what app you're using, but if you click on this, there'll be an option to share the episode, and then you can choose Facebook or email or however you want to share it, and it's done. Really simple. It will take you 30 seconds. If you could do that, that would be super. That's it for this episode, though. We will wrap it up there. Thanks again so much for listening. But for now, it's time to go, Buffalo. You'll hear from us again soon.